Colonel Potter, sir, my last wish is to be buried in my mother's wedding gown.
I've seen these Dodgers for 40 years, all the tricks. Dismissed!
There are television shows, and then there are cultural landmarks. MASH was the latter. For 11 seasons, from 1972 to 1983, it did something no other show had managed to pull off with such consistency. It made you laugh until it made you cry. Set against the backdrop of the Korean War but clearly speaking to the anxieties of the Vietnam era, MASH was never just entertainment. It was a mirror held up to America, reflecting the absurdity of conflict, the fragility of human beings under pressure, and the strange, unbreakable bonds that form when people face the unthinkable together. But here is something that often gets overlooked when people talk about MASH's legacy. The show was not a static institution. It was a living, breathing, constantly shifting organism. The cast changed. The tone evolved. Characters who felt essential to the fabric of the show simply vanished, sometimes with tearful farewells, sometimes without a single goodbye. And every departure left a mark, not just on the storyline, but on the millions of viewers who had come to love these people as if they were family. So what really happened behind the scenes? Why did some of the most beloved actors in the show's history walk away from something so rare and so powerful? The answers are more complicated, more human, and in some cases more heartbreaking than most people realize. Let's go through them one by one. To understand McLean Stevenson's departure, you have to understand what MASH was becoming during its first 3 seasons. The show had launched as a loose, irreverent ensemble comedy, with multiple characters sharing the spotlight in roughly equal measure. Colonel Henry Blake, the bumbling but warm-hearted commanding officer played by Stevenson, was absolutely central to that early dynamic. He was funny, relatable, and completely genuine. His Golden Globe win during those early years was well-deserved, and fans adored him. But as the seasons progressed, something shifted. Alan Alda's Hawkeye Pierce began absorbing more and more of the narrative oxygen. Alda was not simply acting at this point. He was writing, directing, and shaping the creative direction of the series in ways that naturally centered his own character. Hawkeye became the moral conscience of the show, the emotional anchor around which every other character orbited. For someone like Stevenson, who had real ambitions and genuine star quality, watching that happen from the sidelines was deeply frustrating. Stevenson was not shy about his feelings. He made clear in interviews during that period that he wanted to headline his own project, to be the lead rather than a supporting presence in someone else's story. At the end of Season 3, he informed the producers he would not be returning. His decision set off one of the most remarkable creative choices in television history. Rather than giving Henry Blake a comfortable send-off, the writers made a decision that stunned the entire country. In the final moments of the Season 3 finale, Radar walks into the operating room and quietly delivers the news that Colonel Blake's plane was shot down over the Sea of Japan, with no survivors. No music. No dramatic build. Just silence, the hum of surgical equipment, and faces frozen in shock. Many of the cast members did not know the ending was coming. Their reactions were real. What followed Stevenson's departure, however, was sobering. His solo projects failed to connect with audiences. His NBC sitcom was canceled quickly, and a follow-up fared even worse. By the early 1980s, he was openly reflecting on his decision with regret, acknowledging that MASH had been something irreplaceable. When he passed away in 1996, tributes from his former castmates were warm and generous. But the painful irony remained. The role he walked away from became the defining work of his career, and the exit they gave his character became one of the most powerful moments in television history. Wayne Rogers' story is in many ways the opposite of Stevenson's. Where Stevenson was vocal about his frustrations and received a dramatic, nation-stopping farewell, Rogers simply disappeared. One season he was there, the next he was gone. No goodbye episode. No closure. Just absence. Rogers had joined MASH as Trapper John McIntyre, the other half of the show's original comedic duo. His chemistry with Alda was electric. The two of them together gave the early seasons their energy, their wit, and their sense of mischief. Audiences responded to them the way audiences respond to great on-screen partnerships, with total investment and pure delight. The trouble was that Rogers had signed onto the show under the assumption that it would remain a genuine ensemble, with the core cast sharing screen time and narrative weight. As the show evolved and Hawkeye's role expanded dramatically, Trapper increasingly found himself in the role of sidekick, reacting to Hawkeye rather than driving stories of his own. Rogers later described it plainly, noting that his character had essentially been reduced to someone who nodded along with whatever Hawkeye said. What makes Rogers' exit particularly fascinating is the legal dimension. His contract with the show had never actually been formally signed. He had been working on the basis of a handshake agreement, which meant that when the production threatened legal action after he chose not to return for season 4, they had no real leverage. He had not breached anything because nothing had been officially formalized. His departure left the writers scrambling. Season 4 had to open with an offhand explanation that Trapper had been discharged while Hawkeye was away on leave. There was no farewell scene, no moment of closure, and fans were genuinely jarred. The show responded by introducing Mike Farrell as B.J. Honeycutt, a character with more emotional depth and psychological complexity than Trapper had ever been written to have. Many argue, and there is real merit to the argument, that MASH actually became a richer and more mature show in Trapper's absence. Rogers himself went on to build a remarkably successful second career in finance and investment, eventually becoming a prominent television commentator on economic affairs. He was, by all accounts, a deeply intelligent man who had always seen acting as one chapter rather than the whole story. Alan Alda, reflecting on Rogers' departure years later, spoke warmly about him and expressed genuine sadness at the loss. When Rogers passed away in 2015, Alda's tribute was heartfelt and full of affection. Their friendship had survived the abruptness of the goodbye. Of all the departures in MASH's history, Gary Berghoff's may be the most emotionally layered. He was the only member of the television cast who had also appeared in the original 1970 Robert Altman film, and he brought to Radar O'Reilly a tenderness and vulnerability that no one else could have created. Radar was the heart of the 4077th. He was young, wide-eyed, instinctively empathetic, and possessed of an almost supernatural sensitivity to the world around him. When helicopters were still specks on the horizon, Radar already heard them. But the person behind that character was quietly suffering. The production schedule for MASH was relentless, and Berghoff was a perfectionist who held himself to extraordinarily high standards. He struggled with anxiety and depression throughout his time on the show, challenges that received very little public attention at the time but were very real and very consuming. He was also a husband and father, and the long hours on set meant extended periods away from his family. He later spoke about missing crucial years of his daughter's childhood as one of the deepest regrets of his life. By the time season 8 arrived, Berghoff had made his decision. He was emotionally exhausted and personally depleted. He wanted to go home, in every sense of the phrase. To the show's credit, they gave Radar a farewell that matched the weight of his presence. The two-part episode titled Goodbye, Radar is among the most emotionally affecting pieces of television the show ever produced. In it, Radar comes to understand that his time at the unit has run its course, and in the final scene he walks away, his silhouette fading against the sky, his cherished teddy bear left behind on Hawkeye's bunk. It was a masterclass in understated farewell. After MASH, Berghoff stepped back significantly from the entertainment industry. He devoted himself to painting, to wildlife conservation, and surprisingly, to inventing, even securing patents for products he developed. The spotlight, with all its demands and its noise, had taken enough from him. He wanted stillness, and he found it. His story is ultimately one of a person who gave a great deal of himself to a role and needed to reclaim what was left. Larry Linville's departure is perhaps the most artistically self-aware of all the exits on this list. He played Major Frank Burns, the sanctimonious, insecure, and magnificently petty antagonist who served as the principal foil for Hawkeye and Trapper during the show's early seasons. Linville was genuinely excellent in the role. He understood Frank's particular brand of small-minded arrogance with precision and played it with a commitment that made the character both infuriating and somehow pitiable. The problem was that Frank Burns, by design, could not grow. He was written as a static figure, a cartoon of rigid authority and self-important hypocrisy. As the show matured and began reaching for deeper emotional and moral territory, Frank's presence became increasingly incongruous. The other characters were developing, accumulating complexity and contradiction. Frank simply repeated himself, season after season, in a loop that Linville recognized was going nowhere. At the end of season 5, he chose not to renew his contract. His reasoning was clear-eyed and devoid of bitterness. He had taken the character as far as the character could go, and continuing would serve neither the show nor his own creative integrity. It was a decision made from artistic self-awareness rather than ego or frustration, which makes it somewhat unusual in the history of these departures. The effect on MASH was significant and largely positive. With Frank gone, the show introduced David Ogden Stiers as Major Charles Emerson Winchester III, a far more complex antagonist whose arrogance came layered with genuine brilliance, private vulnerability, and an evolving moral consciousness. The show did not need a villain anymore. It needed a worthy adversary, someone who could challenge Hawkeye intellectually and emotionally, and Winchester delivered that in abundance. Linville continued working in television and film after his departure but never found another role that resonated as widely as Frank Burns. He passed away in 2000. His contribution to MASH, though, endures. In a strange way, his willingness to step aside when he recognized that his character had served its purpose was itself a kind of gift to the show's legacy. No conversation about MASH's cast is complete without serious attention to Loretta Swit and what she accomplished over 11 seasons as Major Margaret Houlihan. Unlike the men discussed above, Swit did not leave MASH early. She stayed for every season, from pilot to finale, and her endurance was itself a form of quiet resistance. When the show began, Margaret was a stock character, defined by her nickname, her strictness, and her role as the object of jokes. She was written to be mocked and to provide an easy target for the irreverence of Hawkeye and Trapper. Swit had other ideas. Over the course of the series, she pushed consistently and persistently for her character to be treated as a full human being, a professional, a woman of genuine depth and contradiction. The transformation she achieved is remarkable to watch across the seasons. Margaret became more nuanced, more independent, more complicated. Her relationships deepened. Her politics evolved. Her vulnerabilities became sources of strength rather than punchlines. By the time the finale aired, she was one of the most fully realized characters in the entire show, and one of the few who had undergone a genuine arc of personal growth. Swit was one of only 4 actors to appear in both the very first episode and the very last. That consistency, that commitment, stands as its own testament. She proved that a character initially written as a caricature could become something genuinely powerful if the person playing her refused to accept the limitations she was given. What is striking, looking at all of these departures together, is how human they are. These were not stars driven purely by ego, though ambition certainly played a role in some cases. They were people navigating the ordinary complications of creative work, the desire for recognition, the exhaustion of long-term commitment, the tension between professional success and personal life.